Ray, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on. You are the CEO and strategic marketing consultant of Cornell Content Marketing that helps B2B businesses become thought leaders by creating long-term demand generation strategies and, of course, eliminating costly and unnecessary short-term manipulative tactics like ads. Your journey has been quite interesting in that you began your career in mental health before switching to marketing. And I'd love to get your thinking behind that change.
Yeah. First, thanks for having me on. I'm really glad to be here. Yeah, it was a roundabout career path for sure. So I was raised by police officers
Mhm.
and I grew up with the police department being my
Mm.
babysitter. So my parents would work long shifts and they worked opposite schedules. So in between their shifts, I would be running around the police station, building forts under detective desks and things like that. So I grew up in the world of criminology in a sense. And so growing up with that context and my mom being a gangs detective and my dad being a beat cop and then going into being a traffic officer, the world of law enforcement was second nature. And at the same time, I always had this fascination with criminal behavior and wondering why do people do the things that they do? So I actually went into my career path thinking I was going to be a counselor in the prison system. I wanted to help people change those very insidious and deeply ingrained criminal and substance abuse behaviors. And I got a bachelor's degree in psychology, a master's in professional clinical counseling and marriage and family therapy, and another master's in criminology, and worked in drug rehab facilities and community counseling centers and mental hospitals. 8 years into my career, I realized I hated it. Not because of the people or the patients I was working with. I loved that part. I loved running substance abuse groups. I loved working with probationers and parolees, but it was the system.
Mm.
It was all the bureaucratic red tape. It was all of the hindrances on actually being able to help someone. That was what got me feeling like I just could not make an impact in the world in this way. So all the while I was chasing this career path, I was freelance writing on the side to pay my way, pay my rent, pay all the things. And so I threw myself full time into that side business. And now, 18 years into my marketing career, I have a full service content marketing agency where we do full funnel demand generation, sales enablement, and retention content marketing.
Just looking back at your journey to date, would I be right in saying that you're, in a way, systematically educating your buyers' unconscious minds in a way to drive
Yes.
demand generation?
Yes, very much so. The models, the psychological models that I used with my patients in
Mhm.
the mental health world, transtheoretical model with the stages of change, cognitive behavioral therapy, positive psychology, motivational
Mhm.
interviewing. There we go. Tripping over my words. I still use all of
Mhm.
those same models today, but in marketing. And so when we're crafting a brand's messaging or when we're building out these funnels, we're taking behavioral psychology into account to affect buyer behavior
Hmm.
change.
And given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
My personal area of strength is the linguistic part of it. So sometimes I hop on calls with company leaders, solopreneurs, consultants, CMOs, and they say, we know what makes us special. We know what makes us different, but we're just struggling to find the words to communicate that. We can't figure out what our messaging angle should
Mhm.
be. And I find this is very common when someone is so close to what they do, whether they're a founder of a SaaS company or they've been leading a team as the CMO or CRO for 10 years, that they're so close to it and they have so much history that they can't see what makes them special in the present moment and what's going to carry them through the next 5 or 10 years of growth. That's where I can come in and really help them connect their differentiators within the company that they know so well to where the market is headed and building these long lasting relationships and
Mhm.
bonds between the business and their ideal
Hmm.
buyers.
Certainly. I wonder if you could elaborate perhaps a little bit on that by asking you this question. Given your personal area of strength, what is something that businesses don't know but should?
Oh my gosh. That's like asking how many grains of sand are there. I think So we all have to take this attitude of we're constantly learning. Everyone needs to constantly be learning about themselves, the people they're trying to connect with and affect, and how those two things work together. And it's the reason it has to be constant is because both of those things are constantly evolving as well. And so a lot of times I meet companies where they know their target audience and they know their differentiators and the marketing mechanisms that work really well for them 2 years ago, 3 years ago. But now we're in a very different age. And so I think the underlying theme of all the things that companies don't know is what has changed? What am I missing? How do I need to evolve in order to keep up with this changing landscape?
And now I believe a lot of what you do revolves around what you call the elite method. Would that be correct? Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, the L in elite refers to the learn phase in your biopsychology. And I'm also assuming that as you take this organic demand generation approach, you're wanting to provide education and insights in kind of a modular fashion or a Lego brick type fashion, so it builds on top of each other in order to help people come to a realization and perhaps the desire for a change in outcome. And if we were to do that in an online manner, and I'm just thinking of email as a way to do that, how would you kind of structurally reverse engineer like an email course to mirror the brain's decision-making pathways uncovered in this learn phase?
Yeah. So I like to think of this in terms of a matrix. If the x-axis is the stages of change, which I'll elaborate on that here in a second, that lines up with the sales funnel. And then the y-axis is the cognitive behavioral therapy triangle of our thoughts driving our emotions, which drive our behavior. We have to identify what those thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are at every stage of change as we guide somebody from being a unaware, uneducated prospect through to being a happy, converted new customer. And so within the sales funnel, we traditionally have brand awareness, interest, decision, and action. Within my framework, we also add a fifth stage, which is retention, because marketing cannot end at that conversion. You have to carry through the messaging and continue to nurture people to make sure that they stay with you and adopt your tool. So if we look at that 5-stage sales funnel, typically the B2B buying process for companies that are selling their SaaS platform actually starts at the interest stage. However, according to recent research from Google and Bain, 70% of the B2B buying process has already happened before someone is ready to book a call with your sales rep. So that's 70% of the journey that most companies are not thinking through in terms of controlling the narrative that their ideal buyers are having. That's where the stages of change comes in hand. The stages of change is a model from transtheoretical psychology, which we used a lot in behavior change for substance abuse patients in my previous career. And it starts, when we adapt this to marketing, it starts at the pre-problem stage, meaning somebody doesn't even have the problem that you solve for. Your tool is not yet right for them. But then when they cross into pre-problem awareness, suddenly they have the problem that you solve for. They're just not aware that the problem is what's causing all the pain points they're experiencing. Then we go into problem awareness. This is where they become aware that the problem is causing all of the pains that they're complaining about day to day. And then finally, they start seeking out solutions. This is where the traditional sales funnel of brand awareness actually starts. And so the reason I say this is like a matrix with those stages of change along the x-axis and the cognitive behavioral triangle as the y-axis is at every single stage of change, you have to be thinking about what are the thoughts that we want them to think that are going to generate the emotions we want them to feel in order to drive the behaviors we want them to exhibit in order to move them down that x-axis closer to becoming that converted buyer.
Lots of great information there. And as you were speaking, I was thinking of what I've come across as the 95 to 5 rule, where most buyers aren't ready to buy from you as yet. And so
Right.
I think most companies ignore the 95% and just focus on the 5%. What would you suggest we do in order to be on the radar of the 95% so that when they do come to that problem recognition stage, there is a good chance that they will be looking at us as an authority and perhaps a trusted guide through the process?
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right. That 5% is often
Mhm.
where businesses focus. But the problem is within that 95% are people who might join the
Mhm.
5% in a day, a week, a month, a year. And you want to be on their radar so that you're top of their list once they cross into your 5%. And then your sales team's job becomes so much
Mhm.
easier. To answer your question, you have to create more of a runway to capture that 95% and pull them into your orbit before they're ready to buy your tool. And the way to do that is to think about, like you said earlier, reverse
Mhm.
engineering this process. So, what is the tipping point that takes them from being in the 95% to the 5%? Once you identify that, then you ask, okay, what's the tipping point to get them into that state? And so on and so on. You just keep asking what comes before that, and what comes before that, and what comes before that. And if you can create content, organic content, you don't need to do paid ads
Mhm.
or any kind of paid backlinking, PPC, any of that for these early stage prospects. If you can create organic content that solves problems that are experienced earlier on in the buyer
Mhm.
journey, you can capture their attention, support them as they become closer and closer to becoming in your 5%. And all the while, because you're not selling them anything, because you're purely trying to help them deal with those pain points, you're gaining their trust, you're winning their loyalty, and you're activating the pleasure centers of dopamine and endorphins and oxytocin you need to build these know and trust factors so that when they do enter your 5%, they are 95% sure you're the one they want to buy
Mm.
from, and hopping on a call with your sales rep is just a formality.
Brilliant. Oh, so if I understand this correctly, you're suggesting that we need to spend a good portion of our time before we even start marketing, understanding ideal client
Yes.
profiles, their jobs to be done, and other psychographic, and perhaps there's more elements that you would look at. If so, what would they be?
Exactly. You're exactly right. You have to take that time to really understand it. And we call them buyer psych
Mhm.
profiles. So we create these buyer psych profiles that understand the internal workings of your ideal buyer at each stage of change. Because even though we're talking B2B, and even though we're talking SaaS tools and
Mhm.
technology, which people like to think B2B is very cut and dry, features and benefits, black and white. It's not. Same with SaaS. We think, oh, it's tools, it's you're going to gain this much productivity or this much ROI. It's not that cut and dry. There's a lot of emotion that goes into buying. And if you understand the emotional turmoil that's going on within your ideal buyer early in their
Mhm.
journey, you're able to build those bonds that subliminally tell them, this is a company I want to work with. When we get to the right size, when we have the right budget, we want to buy from
Mhm.
them. So the longer you can spend in that person's mind, the more mind share you can gather, the easier it is going to be for you in the future. The thing is, a lot of companies rely on short-term
Mhm.
mechanisms. They rely on ad campaigns. They rely on outbound and lead generation and cold calling, SDRs, BDRs, all that. That's fine, but what are you doing to build a long-term strategy so that you don't have to rely on those things
Mhm.
forever? And in the future, your leads come to you.
And I'm just thinking of perhaps a specific example, and maybe it's, let's say, a web design firm that does
Mhm.
fairly high-end websites. How would you suggest we go about unpacking the emotional need of
Mhm.
the buying decision makers within a company? Because it's not just necessarily one person, it could be a few people. And
Yes.
it would seem to me, especially with high end purchases, that you need to be able to tailor your message specifically to where they're at and their specific
Mhm.
emotions, as opposed to just using an ideal client profile or an avatar of some sort, making broad stroke judgments. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. So this is the thing in B2B, there are accounts, but within those accounts, there are leads. And within those leads, there are contacts. So you can't just look at, oh, we want to sell this solution to that company and let's go after their CEO or CRO or COO. You can't just target one person within the company. Also, to your point, yes, we want to win the approval of the decision maker, but the decision maker doesn't get involved until around the interest stage of the funnel. Who's bringing the list of options to the decision maker? It's what I call the gatekeepers. I know there are many other terms for this person in marketing. We refer to them as the gatekeepers because they're the ones who get you access to the decision makers. So to start this whole process, first you have to figure out who are the gatekeepers that are going to bring you to the decision makers and who are the decision makers. Most likely, you're going to have 2 to 5 job titles within each, or I shouldn't say job titles, I should say roles really, because a VP of marketing and director of marketing are 2 different job titles, but they serve the same role within a company. So you're going to have 2 to 5 different roles at each stage, gatekeepers and decision makers. And each of those roles is going to have different priorities. They're going to have different things keeping them up at night. They're going to have different responsibilities and KPIs that they have to for the company. So your message is going to be very different for someone who is, let's say, the HR director who might be looking at an LMS tool to help automate their team onboarding and systematize their training. That person might be the gatekeeper, but the CFO who's actually going to sign off on purchasing that LMS tool is the decision maker. You have to speak to both. And this is where personalization and segmentation in, let's say, email marketing or within your communities, that's where that comes really in handy to make sure that you're putting the right message in front of the right people and creating diversified content that isn't just talking about one pain point or one problem that you solve, but talking about multiple, like this spider web of tangential problems that are solved by your solution.
In terms of unpacking this, are you suggesting we invest in one-on-one interviews, surveys? What would be your go-to strategies, broadly speaking?
Yeah. So during that learn phase, there are a lot of things that we'll do. We'll read Reddit forums. We'll look at LinkedIn groups. We'll look at LinkedIn influencers, so to speak, and look at the comments in their threads and see what people with certain job titles are saying. And yes, we'll do customer interviews as well. And that can be a really time-consuming process. There are tools out there that can help companies automate their customer interviewing process. And we're experimenting with those and seeing how we can expedite this, because most companies, when they hear customer interviewing, they go, oh, geez, this is going to take us 9 months just to collect the data. So we're shortening that timeline. But yes, the more you can get the information straight from the ideal customers that you're trying to replicate and clone, the better. Another thing that we'll do is we set up feedback loops between sales and marketing and between customer service or service delivery and marketing to understand from sales, what are the complaints people are hearing? What are the objections? What are the things that they're saying, oh, this other company promised they could do this, and that was really appealing to my boss, but I'm really interested in this thing that you guys offer. We need to know that information in marketing to make sure that we're putting the right language in for the right personas at the right time. Similarly, once you have customers who are onboarded and using your tool, we want to understand from customer service and service delivery, what are the things that they're loving? What value are they actually getting now that they're implementing the tool and the platform? Or what are they struggling with? How are they resisting adoption? What problems or what kind of interpersonal and team dynamics are going on that are preventing them from using every feature they've paid for and might be causing some frustration? Again, we need to know that early on in marketing so that what we're promising and what problems we're solving with our content is actually what they're experiencing on the other end. So
Is talking through that enough to allay the concerns and perhaps the pressures of needing to deliver quickly? Because, as you said, the learning phase can be quite time consuming for companies or clients that are wanting to see results fairly quickly, how would this discussion or plan of action unfold in order to balance
Yeah.
the needs of both sides?
Yeah. So whenever we're talking about demand generation and content marketing, it's an investment of time. You have to be willing to commit 6, 9, or 12 months to seeing results. Now, the thing about that is once you invest that time, you're going to see the ROI month over month thereafter. For example, we have a client that we wrote content for back in 2018. They're still making sales on the blogs that they paid us for once, 7 years ago now. They're still making money on that content every single day. So with content marketing, you pay for something once, you build it right, and all you have to do thereafter is enhance it, improve it. And in terms of the short-term gains, as we're building this thing out, we are learning so much about the way that the brand is resonating or not with the market, the language that works or doesn't. We can test things out and optimize the existing marketing assets in the moment while we work on creating new and better marketing assets for the long term.
Okay. Very interesting. I would assume that you would want to encourage people to have some sort of an experience, or I think it may be called the near exposure effect, in at least from a psychological angle, to your product, your service, etc. How would you embed that, if that is the right perspective, into your content?
Yeah. So are you referring to things like product demos and seeing what the tool can do?
In my mind, at least, for at least higher end products, a demo requires a call, which requires scheduling time, a little bit of an extra action on the part of the potential customer. Is there a way wherein they can almost self-serve their
Mm,
exposure to what you have to
yeah,
offer?
absolutely. So in my experience working with B2B tech, SaaS, e-learning companies, the tools do so much more than
Mhm.
just one thing. And there are so many features on the back end once you get in there that if you can take just one feature per week and showcase that in a short 30 to 90-second
Mhm.
video and embed those mini demos into your content in every platform. So let's say you decide that you're going to do blog content, LinkedIn content, email, maybe you're going to do something like hosted webinars. You can embed that mini demo content to give people a sneak peek of, ooh, I want
Mhm.
that. You want to give them that feeling of desire, something that is the grass is greener on the other side of the
Mhm.
fence, to pique their curiosity and get them to lean in. Also, it builds transparency. So many companies create this barrier of frustration where they will not show you the back end of the tool
Mhm.
until you book a demo with someone. And yet, so many companies, like you said earlier, only 5% might be ready to actually schedule that
Mhm.
demo. So, if you can preview that for people earlier on, not only are you building trust in the form of being transparent, but also you're satisfying their curiosity, giving them the dopamine hits that make their brain very happy. And they're building this trust with you long before the competition is.
Mhm. With technical products, especially, you often have to deal with technical buyers who, at least in my experience, may have the propensity to lean towards what we would call the curse of knowledge. And I'm
Mm.
curious, how would you mitigate that while still trying to establish subject matter authority?
Yeah. So again, you have to think about what's going on for that person in their
Mhm.
minds. Usually, if someone has that sort of, tell me the phrase you used again,
The curse of knowledge. Because
curse of
yeah.
knowledge. Thank you. Yes. Yes. There's a level of ego
Mhm.
going on there where they want to appear very knowledgeable. They want to appear as though, oh, yeah, you salesperson, none of your tricks are going to work on me. I already know about this and this. I've been in the industry longer than you have. Tell them they're right.
Mhm.
Tell them, hey, you probably have a lot more knowledge and background experience than I do because you've been doing this for 15 years or 12 years. I really got into this industry 4 years ago. And so, this has been my crash course in it, but this is where we're headed. And this is what we can do. And this is what we do differently than what was done when you first entered the industry. And acknowledge the fact that they have that background knowledge and see where you can find the common ground. Because someone who is making the conversation a bit more difficult because they have that curse of knowledge, you're going to have to re-educate them, especially with how fast-paced the SaaS world is nowadays. Everything is different from how it was 3 years ago. So you're going to have to do a lot of unlearning, but nobody likes to be told that they're wrong or that their knowledge is out of date. So take an approach of building on that knowledge as opposed to trying to course correct them.
And it's sound advice. So if I understand this correctly, you're using your psychological principles and pathways that you've gained through your previous career, overlaying them over the buyer's journey and trying to match things up, which makes a lot of sense. To ensure we're on track with each component or stage, what metrics or actions are you looking for? And I wonder if you could walk us through that whole perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing is, when it comes to metrics, so as I mentioned before, there's the cognitive behavioral therapy triangle, which says that our thoughts affect our emotions, which affect our behaviors then drive our thoughts, and vice versa. And it goes around and around, kind of like this recycling symbol triangle. But with marketing metrics, the only thing that we can measure are the behaviors. So we have to understand that to an extent, metrics are only going to give us 1/3 of the picture. With that said, we also have to be okay with that. And we have to look at which metrics are going to be most meaningful for us. So as we start to go through these stages of change and into the sales funnel, what are the indicators that someone is actually moving into the next stage? At the beginning, it might be things like they follow you on LinkedIn or they land on your website. As they move through this journey, did they come back? Are they a returning visitor to your website? What is the time on page for that particular user? Are they spending more than 45 seconds on your website? If so, that indicates they're most likely going to be moving into the interest stage. Did they opt in for a recent event? Did they opt in for your email newsletter or a lead magnet or a tool? Are they coming closer to you? Did they maybe engage with your content on LinkedIn? Did they, when they signed up for your emails, did they click through the links? So you have to put yourself in their shoes and say, if I was this person and I was struggling with XYZ problem at the, let's say, problem awareness stage of change, what would I do if I was interested in my company? I probably wouldn't be ready to book a call. So I'm not going to measure that metric as an indicator of this stage. That's something for the interest and decision stages. But I might read a couple blogs. I might download our toolkit. I might engage with or watch a video on YouTube that we created. I might watch half of this explainer video. You have to see what things make sense within that given state of readiness to buy or lack thereof. And the thing is, we don't necessarily want things like, let's say, comments on LinkedIn. That's a big one that a lot of companies try to put so much time and effort into increasing the comments on LinkedIn content. What does that really indicate? Does that really indicate that someone's going to buy from you? No, most people who buy from you have never commented on a single LinkedIn post ever. So why measure and give weight to those particular metrics? We have to tie the metrics to what it means and what we can rationally connect the dots to in terms of the emotions and the thoughts that are leading to that behavior we're able to track.
That makes a lot of sense. With this idea of ensuring that we're tracking the next emotion and the next behavioral indicator, I'm curious, do you create feedback loops between, say, sales teams and content creators to help identify perhaps some of the more unspoken buyer objections? If so, how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So sales reps, in my experience, are very, very insightful. They might have a call with someone who says, oh, yeah, we're just not ready to purchase right now, but we want to get a sense of what your tool can do. And the sales rep can tell
Mhm.
when someone is hiding or saying between the lines, my boss said, no, we're not going to buy this
Mhm.
right now. Or we just don't have the budget for it. Maybe we'll be able to buy it in a year or two. So I think you cannot discredit the emotional intelligence of sales reps and likewise customer support representatives who can channel those insights based on very valid experiences and historical data back to marketing to start to help prime the pump, so to speak, and get those people pre-sold by addressing those objections earlier
Mm.
on.
So apart from emotional intelligence, how would they really give voice to it accurately when it's not being said explicitly?
I think that really depends on the sales rep. Some sales reps that I've worked with are very subtle and nuanced, and they like to really read between the lines and leave
Mm-hmm.
things unspoken. And some are very
Mm-hmm.
direct and they just cut to the chase. And so they'll have a suspicion and they'll say, oh, so it sounds like you guys really don't have the budget for this right now. Is that right? And then sometimes it's very refreshing, or sometimes it'll be taken as presumptuous or whatever the case may
Mm-hmm.
be. It's all about interpersonal dynamics.
Okay.
So it's hard to say because every sales rep I've ever worked with has their own unique
Mm-hmm.
style of selling because selling is so relational. It's hard to try to corral or categorize these insights that you're gathering when it all depends on the source. But in my experience, when you have sales reps who've been doing their jobs for 3, 4, 5+ years, they know what they're
Mm.
doing and they're good at it. They wouldn't have gotten into sales if they couldn't read other
Mm-hmm.
people. And you have to put trust in your people. You have to trust your team and trust the insights, because otherwise, if you're just going to base everything on data, well, everyone has access to data
Yeah.
nowadays. What's going to set you apart? What's going to set you apart is those human insights that you're only able to gather by trusting your team and supporting one another.
I'm also curious if, say, you were speaking to the SVP of sales, for example, and pitching a potential website redesign with some sales enablement features, etc. Assuming that they were in the 95% that weren't necessarily actively looking for a solution, how would you frame the educational piece to get on their radar, but also provide enough insight for them to think a little bit differently about how their website's currently performing? Because I would imagine that for some ideal client profiles, you might want a shorter course, if I could put it that way, as opposed to some others, which would require a bit of a longer
Mm,
course. And with it, of course, comes the idea of sales cycles and complexity.
yes. So, this idea of creating a personalized journey is all the rage nowadays. And what I'm seeing is a lot of companies are getting overwhelmed by it. And so often I encourage them to, let's go back to basics before we get into creating 97 different
Mm-hmm.
versions of the home page to test out with 97 different variables. So when I say go back to basics, what I mean is no matter where someone is in the buyer journey, they should be able to find what they need on your
Mm-hmm.
homepage. Now, your website needs to follow basically an upside down version of the sales funnel. So if you think about someone who is ready to buy and they land on your website, you want them to just have no resistance. You want them to be able to find what they need, book a call or self-serve or get started or book a demo, whatever it is, right
Mm-hmm.
away. And then if you think of someone who's not quite ready, they want to learn a little bit more, they're going to be the ones who spend more time on your homepage anyway. So essentially, you start to see the structure of your website take the shape of the sales funnel in reverse, where the top frame, your hero section, should be geared towards people who are ready to buy right now. As you go down the page, gear the next one or two sections to the people who are pretty sure they want to buy from you, but they're not quite positive. They just need a little bit extra information. Focus sections 2 and 3 on those people. Then the people who are more on the fence, who need more of that education, who need more understanding of how you're going to impact their business, they're the ones that are going to spend more time on your website anyway. So as they are scrolling, because they're the only ones who are going to scroll, people who are ready to buy right now, they're not going to scroll. They've already made their decision. They want to act. The people who are going to scroll, you can tailor sections 4, 5, and 6 on your homepage to them. And then lastly, towards the bottom, that's why you usually see things like blogs, blog feeds, Instagram grids, YouTube, Reel, things like that towards the bottom of the page, because that's where people who are very early in the learning process, they're the only ones who scroll far enough to actually reach that information because they're trying to take it all in.
Definitely. So with this idea of educational content, would I be right in the saying that we probably should put more value in gaining our potential clients' email addresses as one of the first indicators of trust in the journey with them? Or do you have a different
Not necessarily. Yeah. So I wouldn't say that gaining the email address is the goal in terms of indicating trust, because I think trust can be earned by not asking for that information. So here's what I mean. Nowadays, we all get bombarded, cold emails, cold calls, cold outreach messages on LinkedIn saying, we have this solution. Does it interest you? Can I book a call? Can I get your email address? Or we're getting bombarded with ads that say, put your email address here and you'll get this coupon or this exclusive offer or this whatever it may be. We all know that when a company is asking for our email address, they're trying to sell us something. If trust is not established before that, you're not going to give your email address, or you are in a very guarded fashion just to get whatever they're offering, and then you're going to opt out. So the trust exchange actually needs to happen long before that. You need to earn their trust long before that. Somebody will only give you their email address if they like you. The email address, the opt-in, is actually an indicator that, hey, they want to hear more from us. They like us. Not an indicator of trust. Trust happens when is indicated by when somebody comes back to you again and again, whether that's by seeing your LinkedIn content and giving it a thumbs up, or going back to your website many times, or repeatedly opening your nurture emails. If they open 3 or 4 or 5 of your emails, that indicates trust. Because as soon as someone stops trusting you, they just stop listening.
In terms of those who I would call lurkers, they frequently visit your content, but they don't necessarily interact, provide that thumbs up or comment or anything of that nature, but they're watching, they're listening, etc. What would be the best way to engage with them? Because there is the danger that some of them could drop off, given life gets busy and there's a lot of noise.
So first, I would ask, if they're lurkers, are they worth your time and energy? If it's been 3 months and you've tracked their behavior and they continue to just lurk, maybe they're just not ever going to buy from you. So is it even worth trying to get them to that next stage? If you decide yes, then the next question will be, who is it that's lurking? It could be a competitor. It could be someone who is an assistant to the CFO who is just tasked with doing some research. It could be someone who is hopeful that one day they can purchase from you, but for now they're stuck purchasing a tool that's way cheaper and more limited, and they just want to stay current on what you're doing because once their company gets to a certain size, then they'll be able to afford you. I don't think lurking is necessarily a bad thing that needs to have behavior change inflicted upon it. It's more important to understand who is lurking, why are they lurking, and then if it's someone you still want and you've decided it is worth your time, Then asking yourself, okay, so what is it going to take? Like, we need to understand who this person is first. What is their job title, and why do we still care about winning over their attention and affection? Only then will you know what you need to put in front of them to move them to the next stage.
I'm just thinking of situations where you get a call out of the blue saying, I've been watching your content for so many years or months, etc. I'd like to do business in that.
Yeah.
In my mind, I had no idea that they were even present, but they were obviously listening and watching.
And yet you did your job because your content led them to reach out to you and call you. So win.
It certainly is. But in my mind, I was thinking, I didn't even know that I was on the right track. So for those of us who are thinking that way, knowing that there are potential clients out there, what could we do to discover who these people potentially are in the first place?
Yes. Nowadays, there are a number of tools that I'm sure you've probably heard of, lots of these ABM marketing tools and intent data tools and things like that. There are some that my team and I like, Ample Market and Market Intent, these tools that allow you to collect information on leads, and then you can organize that information into accounts. And then you can very delicately do some warmed outreach to those accounts to gauge interest and get a more accurate timeline of when those lurkers might become those warmed up leads.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but ultimately with these tools, they really only work when the person visits your website or some sort of own media, as opposed to a third-party platform.
Correct. Yeah. And there are ways to track engagement on things like LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, but there are so many issues right now with data sharing and permissions and privacy that for now, to avoid trouble, I would recommend sticking with tracking data on your own website. Or if you're able to partner with a company that is ethically sourcing this information, where they can find that someone is interacting with other sites that are educating on a similar topic or competitors' sites or things like that. But you have to be very careful when it comes to this data mining. And that's why we only work with companies that we trust, because when it comes to cookies and privacy and data sharing, it's a very tumultuous ground as companies are trying to push the boundary of what's been done before and get more valuable data, while at the same time, those same people at home don't want their own data shared and tracked. So it's a tricky balance that's constantly changing right now.
I appreciate that. AI, it's all the rage. Just about everyone I know of is using AI to generate content. What's your take on this? What should we be careful about while still seeking to resonate with our potential clients?
Yeah, AI is fantastic for analyzing what's out there. If you ask AI to give you a synopsis of the strengths of the content on your top 3 competitors, and then ask it to tell you what's missing from their content, it can give you great direction on opportunities that you have to create content. It can also give you great outlines. It can help you with research, but you always want to fact check that. But this is my own personal opinion. I know there's lots of people who will disagree with me out there, but you have to create the content yourself. The reason being, AI generated content, first of all, Google is penalizing websites that have predominantly AI generated content because it knows that quality and its new EEAT model, that is what users want. Users want quality content that has depth and value. And AI is great at regurgitating what already exists out there. It's not that great at coming up with new insights, as we were talking about sales reps. Sales reps have these great minds for understanding what people are thinking and feeling without it having to be said. If you can tap into that knowledge base and insert that into your content's going to have soul, something that AI generated content is severely lacking. So we use AI as a tool to assess, where can we do it better? How can we outperform our competition? If we're looking at the Google search results for a particular keyword, We want to know what's lacking from within there and how are we going to top that to satisfy the AIO algorithms. When it's used as a tool, that's where you can generate really powerful content. But when you use it as a replacement for human creativity and insights, that's where your content's going to fall flat.
Would you say that it would be worth investing in AI or trying to create your own custom LLMs based on inputs from sales conversations, customer interviews, etc., to better incorporate original insights that speak to your specific ICP?
Yes, absolutely. There's actually a company that we've been talking to recently that is going to help us conduct customer interviews faster and then also analyze the sentiments, almost like a qualitative data study of those customer interviews. That's where internal, kind of like these closed circuit loop AI LLMs can actually come in handy, because then you are not getting outside noise and outside feedback. You're saying the people that we're talking to, the data that we are collecting, and the value that we can bring to these individuals, combine all that and give me an analysis of what are the common themes, what are the strengths, what are the issues that they are bringing up that are not addressed in our content. And that's where you create a short list of priorities in what you need to create next.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. Do you want to give a shout out to that particular company you mentioned?
Yes, it's a great company called Cognistream. They're a startup. I just met them at SaaS Stock. They're based in Ireland. They do amazing, absolutely amazing.
Brilliant. We've covered, I think, a fair bit of ground here, Ray. I'm sure there's plenty more we could dive into, but with this idea of systematically educating your buyers, unconscious minds to be able to build scalable sales engines, as it were, do you find that there's perhaps a couple of areas that we haven't covered and don't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
I think nowadays we cannot discount the value of empathy. So when I say that, historically, the content that performs the best is content that says, here's how to do XYZ. You have a goal. Here's how you accomplish that goal, whether it's a particular project outcome or using a particular tool to do a particular project, or whether you're trying to grow your business in some macro view objective. And that content is all well and good, but we have to layer into it empathy. You have to understand where your ideal buyers are in their journey, the day-to-day frustrations that they're struggling with, and understand what are their goals as a professional, as someone who is in a particular role. Are they trying to look like they are trustworthy, intelligent, ambitious, goal-oriented? They want to maybe look like they have the company's bigger interests in mind so that they can have a long career within the same organization. Do they want to have an impact on the company? Are they more team-oriented? You can learn a lot from someone's role within a company, and then you can tailor your language to speak to those inner driving goals, not just the objectives that they've been tasked with. And when you do that, when you layer those things together, your content becomes so much more impactful.
And to wrap up, Ray, if you were to listen to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
Oh, take the time, especially in the B2B SaaS world. We're moving so fast. There's always threat of competition sneaking up and releasing an MVP before you do, or something like that. But if you really want to be successful long-term, take the time to understand who you're trying to speak to, because then every ounce of effort that you put into your marketing and your sales thereafter will be so much more effective, rather than flying through it, staying superficial, staying surface level, and not getting much out of it.
If listeners are curious and want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
Yeah, you can check out our website at cornellcontentmarketing.com or find me on LinkedIn. My name's Ray, spelled weird, Rai, Cornell on LinkedIn.
We'll include links to that in the show notes. Ray, thank you so much for doing this.
Likewise. Thanks so much for having